So all of you that are here live and also joining us through the live recording that's going to be posted afterwards, thank you for joining us for our live tutorial on diagnosing medical device requirements for healthy projects. As I mentioned, my name is James. With me is Trevor Bradley. He'll be handling any questions as we go along, so please type them into the chat box if you are joining us live. So I'm going to start out by talking about an old movie. I'm not going to spoil it completely, but I will spoil it a little bit. But it's over 20 years old, so if you haven't seen it yet, I don't really feel bad for partially spoiling it. So this is a John Travolta movie called Phenomenon. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because at the beginning of the movie, it's on his birthday, he's out drinking with some friends, and John Travolta's character goes outside and looks up. That's what the scene is here. And as he's looking up into the stars, he sees this flash of light and it knocks him over. And when he comes to, he's kind of disoriented. He doesn't really know what happened. His friends bring him back inside. But since the movie's called Phenomenon, you're kind of led to believe that there was some sort of alien intervention of some sort, because the symptoms that he starts exhibiting after that are very strange. He's suddenly super smart. He's reading multiple books per day. Eventually he starts being able to do telekinesis and these different things. So everybody's looking at these events, and first they think that he's crazy. Later on, they start to be scared of him because he has all this power. They don't really know what's going on. But everyone assumed that there was some sort of supernatural space-related alien phenomenon that caused all of these symptoms. So as a result, they weren't really looking for regular kind of diagnosis or solutions that could have caused all of these symptoms that he was experiencing. They just assumed that it was unknowable. Well, as it turns out, it was actually a brain tumor that he had that caused this rare condition that was causing his brain to perform in very strange kind of supernatural ways almost. But the point is, until he recognized that it was actually a medical condition and not a supernatural, unknowable problem, he wasn't looking for possible solutions for it. And I think that is sometimes the way that we approach requirements as well. We experience the symptoms, so we know that there are problems present in our projects, that things aren't moving as smoothly as they could, or maybe there's unexpected recalls that happen after a project was launched, and we're just scratching our head saying, what's going on here? Why is this happening? But if you're to step back and look at it, you might see that you can actually know what the problem is. So what we're going to do today is, through a series of examples that we'll take the time to explain thoroughly, we're going to look at the most common problems that people face with requirements and how those lead to problems later on in projects. So a little bit of background on Curare. In case you haven't heard of us before, we are a Canadian company that started with a product called QV-Trace. So QV-Trace is a verification tool for embedded software systems. So anything that you can imagine, a physical device where there's software that's making the decisions on what it will do next, QV-Trace is for that. So think fighter jets, autonomous vehicles, spacecraft, things like that. So QV-Trace is designed to identify requirements errors as early as possible in the design stage. So as you're working on the designs of the project, you can run it through QV-Trace and it will identify unexpected behavior in your designs. The difference between regular testing and simulation in QV-Trace is that we use formal methods, so converting the formula, or converting the designs into mathematical formulas in order to be able to verify that they're going to perform the way that we expected. So the beauty of formal methods is that it can exhaustively cover entire ranges of product behavior, so that you know under all these different circumstances it's going to work as expected. So what we found in looking for these requirements errors, or looking for these engineering errors, was actually that more than half of the errors that QV-Trace was finding could be traced back to the requirement stage. So we did a little bit more research into this and found that it was actually a very common problem. Nearly 10% of all project cost increases are due to poor requirements. Nearly 50% of all projects fail to meet their goals because of poor requirements. And more than half of all engineering errors can ultimately be traced back to a problem in the requirement. So either a misunderstanding of a requirement, maybe something that was contradicting other requirements in the document. But overall, more than half of them could be traced back to some requirements-based issue. So why are we focusing on medical devices now? When we launched the solution for requirements analysis called QV Scribe, our focus was on safety critical systems that were complex, and that typically had large teams working on these documents. Those were the ones that were having the hardest time bringing all of these different sources together and keeping everybody on the same page with the way that the requirements were written. Now, from a personal perspective, I see a good opportunity for our tools to help in the medical device area, both QV Scribe, which we'll be talking about today, as well as QV Trace, as we think about robotic surgery and technologies like that moving forward. These embedded systems have a real need to be verified exhaustively, that they're going to perform the way that you expect them to every time. So from a personal perspective, though, I've always had an interest in helping people in any way that I can, whether it's personal friends or talking with people in my family, things like that. It's just something that I've always been passionate about. So the opportunity to leverage our technology to help the hundreds and millions of people that are using the technologies that you folks are developing really speaks to me personally. I've had personal experiences with, like many or all of you probably have, losing loved ones to cancer. And just reading through the bios of the companies of the folks that have registered for this, seeing the work that you're doing for brain aneurysms. I lost a close friend of mine just a couple of years ago due to a sudden brain aneurysm. My grandmother suffers from macular degeneration and is losing her sight. So as I read these technologies that your companies are developing, it really speaks to me because I can see the ways that I'm going to benefit from what you folks are working on. So for me personally, I'm very interested in helping you folks make your devices as good as they can be, and also to help the process be as efficient as possible so that you're not wasting time in the development phase and then not dealing with as many recalls or issues later on for these issues that could have been traced back to the requirements in the first place. So in the medical device industry, there are some massive problems right now. Recalls are on the rise. Software is the #1 cause of these errors for the 12th straight quarter. The total cost of the industry is upwards of $5 billion per year. And one major recall can set a company back upwards of $600 million. And that's just in fixing that issue, let alone the actual impact on your brand and sales going forward and things like that. So the stakes are higher for companies in the medical device space. We're dealing with every issue is potentially life-threatening. Every issue is going to affect the health and condition of everybody that's on board with using your products and your customers and your stakeholders. So the stakes are understandably higher. So the penalties and the corrections are just a part of the true cost of what it means to have these errors. So it's important to catch them as soon as possible. So if we look at that stat before, more than half of the errors originate in the requirements, and we're dealing with these types of numbers for these issues that are arising. It's really important to focus on the requirements so that you can get that right the first time. So that's why we developed QV Scribe. We looked into possible solutions that were out there that could help folks with the quality of their requirements. There's lots of tools out there for EQMS systems, lots of systems there for requirements management, but our focus was really on improving the quality of the statements themselves, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So in short, QV Scribe uses natural language processing, artificial intelligence, to automatically check your requirement statements for clarity and consistency. And the outcomes of that are that you actually save time in the development process by streamlining and get everyone on the same page and reducing risk. So you'll see me reference QV Scribe throughout the discussion. Even if this, you look into this and it's not a fit for your company, you will still have a lot of benefit from the talk today. So most of the focus is going to be on the content covering these 5 errors. So looking at what Curare does, we're not a QMS system. There are people who spend their entire career working on requirements. Many of you took the time to fill out the survey before the talk today, and I really appreciate you doing that. Looking at the results, more than half of you indicated that you actually are in charge of other people that are writing requirements. So you're the one responsible for all the requirements that either your department or sometimes your company is putting out, or you just have people underneath you. So if you have kind of grabbed onto this area and you're passionate about improving the requirements and seeing how you can change your company and improve the results that you're getting through better requirements, the chances are if you're in that position, you probably have people that are working underneath you that you're responsible for keeping them on the same page as well. So that's where we come in. We help individuals to write requirements like the pros, and then we also help folks that are working with their requirements as a part of a larger team to get their whole team on the same page. And those specific rules and the specific language that you've decided to use for your company, we help you to emphasize that through everyone at your company and to be able to get everybody on the same page. So kind of an interesting fact, you may or may not be following this, but the FDA in the US is actually going through an initiative right now called the Case for Quality Initiative. So they've got a number of companies that are signed up. It involves some extra tracking, some extra paperwork that you need to do. But ultimately, you'll notice that in the quote there, they say, through the ongoing initiative, they're working to create a competitive marketplace for device quality, creating market-based and regulatory incentives to reliably and consistently manufacture high-quality devices. So what that means is the FDA sees the value of improving the overall quality of these devices. They want fewer penalties, they want fewer recalls, and they want every device that's produced to be at the highest level possible to reduce these types of errors. So not only do you get the advantages of being the respected company for bringing these high quality products to market and building that trust in your brand, but you also potentially going forward will have the ability to receive incentives from the FDA for achieving those high standards of quality that they're looking for. So that's something to keep in mind as well. So what are these common requirements errors? So in a perfect world, there's a few places where things can go wrong, but in a perfect world, you have the idea of what this requirement needs to be. You're the subject matter expert, so you know what this device is supposed to do. You know how it's supposed to work. You know the standards that it needs to follow. So in a perfect world, you get that down on paper in the requirements documents, and then every person who picks it up down the road is going to understand exactly what you wrote in that requirement. It's going to be easy to read, concise, clear, and as the product is being developed, each of these standards are being followed closely. But we know that that's not the way it really works. So here are some, I've identified kind of 5 common requirements errors that we see in medical device development. The first one we're going to talk about is wrong content. So saying what you mean to say, but it's actually just the wrong information. What we'll call typos, so mistakenly writing the wrong thing. If you really thought about it, you know better, but in the instance, you just wrote the wrong word, maybe used a synonym instead of the real word. Another common problem is that your requirements are not clear. So different language that you use can possibly be misunderstood by the reader, so you're expecting one thing and you get a different result. Next is not testable. We also had a lot of folks that signed on for today's call that are involved in QA and RA. So for you folks, I'm sure you see this all the time. There's requirements that are coming down to you and that you're testing are not actually testable. So you need to go back and rewrite those requirements, or maybe they just don't get tested the way that they should because they're not specific enough. And then lastly is any requirements that are inconsistent. So if it contradicts requirements that are elsewhere in your document, it doesn't matter if that's a clear, concise requirement written on its own. If it doesn't fit within the rest of the document, it's going to cause problems as soon as you try to actually build this product. So the first one we'll focus on is the wrong content. So you say what you mean to say, but it's incorrect. So you see it's just red across the board on this one, right from the beginning, unless by some miracle you accidentally write the wrong thing, and then that's what you didn't write what you mean to say, but then they end up picking it up. You're going to end up with the wrong information. So a couple of examples of this is possibly that you or the person who's writing the requirements misunderstands the real stakeholder needs. So you end up speccing a product that actually is not what it should be. You could be working off an outdated or incorrect standard, so that if these actual requirements that you wrote out are followed, you'll end up with a product that doesn't comply. And then lastly, you might have unrealistic or unattainable goals. So these are 3 things that you as a requirements engineer or your team as the requirements engineers are responsible to know. This is really at the core of the requirements. Anytime that you're in a review meeting or a few folks are reviewing requirements that have been written, these are where you want to spend your time. You want to be focusing on these types of errors because these are the ones that require the subject matter expertise. These are the ones that require a knowledge of your industry, and that's really what these groups that develop requirements are paid to do. This is the core of what you're working on, is to make sure you get these requirements right. The other issues that we're going to look at are a series of red herrings or other issues that can get in the way, so that when you're like to be focusing on these, you spend more and more time focusing on these less important issues. So we're going to cover some of those as well. You'll see the relationship throughout between the professional and QV Scribe. Our goal with creating this tool was to stay out of your way, so that these types of issues that you're looking for that actually require an understanding of the project and the actual content of what you're writing still fall in the hands of the professional. That's what you've studied for, that's what you've trained for, this is what your focus should be on. And then QV Scribe can help apply the principles for best practices for requirement writing. So we can help clarify your content if there's vague language or problems in that way, inconsistencies. We can help identify those issues and bring them to your attention so that you can focus on those more important issues. So the second one that we'll look at are what I'll call typos. So mistakenly writing the wrong thing. So you know exactly what this requirement means, you know what you're trying to say, but somehow by the time you actually write it out, you mistakenly use a different word. And these types of errors are pretty common in requirements documents. So these could be spelling and grammatical errors, also referencing an item by the wrong name, writing the wrong unit for a quantity or a measurement on board as well. And then the bottom one, the problem exists between the keyboard and the chair. So that's just, you have it in your head, but somehow by the time it gets down to the keyboard, you haven't, the issue that you're trying to communicate doesn't make it to the page. So of course, at that stage, anything that gets picked up from that wrong requirement, unless it's caught, is going to lead to problems later on in the review and design process as well. So I'll give a couple examples of these. So one way to control this is to make sure that you're using a glossary and that all of the terms that are listed in your requirement spec are very clear on what they're referring to. So we're going to be using some examples today from a pacemaker specification. This is a publicly made, this document has been made publicly available. And so you can see the link at the bottom there if you want to go to it, but it's from one of the big guys. And you'll see that this document has some issues. So every example that we're looking at today comes from this one document, and they're really just representations of what we find in several of the requirements documents that we see. It's always the same issues coming up, so that's why we're covering this in our call today. So here are a couple of requirements from different places in this document. One says a means shall be provided for the physician to manually adjust the sensing threshold of the device. The other one says that the device shall be capable of storing the patient's indications for pacing. So here it's very clear. We know what's referring to the physician. We know that we're talking about the patient in the other one. But what happens when we look at another requirement that's now talking about the user? So this is about the user interface of the software to control this device. And it says the user shall have the option of viewing the electrograms on the screen or through a printed copy. So in this case, we've already identified in this document that we have a physician and we have a patient. So now when we're talking about a user, it's not immediately clear who the user is in this case. So that could lead to problems down the road where you're designing a UI for the patient when really it's the physician that's going to be using this. And so by using those terms consistently throughout the document, you can make sure that every time that you're referring to a particular actor in the process or a particular component, by using that same name consistently and keeping a glossary, it allows you to make sure that there's no misunderstandings of this type. So for you to change that, and I really don't know what the intended meaning was. I gather that it's the physician. So if we were to update that, we could say the physician shall have the option of viewing electrograms on the screen or through a printed copy. No harder to write that than the other way, but it's infinitely more clear for whoever picks this up. So these types of errors can be difficult to find because they just blend in with everything else. If you're reading that and you're familiar with this device, you've been working on it for months of collecting these different requirements and bringing them together, you know what you mean by the user, but it's not necessarily clear to whoever's going to be picking it up next what you're referring to. So these can be like finding a needle in a haystack. They can be hidden in a pile of good content. They blend in with the rest of the material. Before long, you just start looking at this document for the 100th time and everything all looks the same. And you might not know exactly what you're looking for. So that's one area that QV Scribe can help. I'm going to show you what this actually looks like in real time through first the consistency analysis. There's actually 3 types of analysis that QV Scribe will do. And I'm just going to jump out and show what that looks like in the tool itself. So down here. So this is QV Scribe for Word. So we have 2 versions right now, QV Scribe for Word and QV Scribe for Excel. They actually come together in our QV Scribe for Teams package. So if you're working with another requirements management tool, I saw some mention there using Perforce Helix or Siemens Polarian solution, as well as Jira. All of you that filled out the survey indicated that you did use Microsoft Word and Excel sometimes. So we have different workflows to work with these different tools, but our tool lives within Microsoft Office. So I'm showing it to you in Word here today. And typically, if you're working with another requirements management tool, we'd be using Excel, but I'd be happy to walk through that with you for the particular tool that you're using. So here we are with the consistency tab open, and you'll see that we have terms and units that are both checked here. So all that the terms analysis is doing, it uses natural language processing to find all of the nouns that are present in your document, and it pulls them out and puts them in list form for you. So I've sorted them now according to how many times each term appears. So if I was looking for that word user, I can just scroll through the list here and look for it, or I can type it in at the top. And if I want to see how many times user comes out, I see all the relative terms to that as well. I click the user, it'll actually show me in context where that word appears. And then I can look at it and say, okay, in this case, when I'm saying user, am I referring to the patient or am I referring to the physician? And user might be the right word for it, as long as it's being used consistently and it is used in that glossary. You just want to make sure you're not referring to the same term by different names throughout the document. So that's the terms consistency. You can search for different terms as well, but just seeing them in list form allows you to just quickly review all the terms that you're using without reading through the entire document over and over and over, which can save a lot of time by bringing those to your attention. And it will also show similar requirements as well, similar terms as well. So if I click on user here and there's others that use that term, they'd show up there as well. So that's the terms consistency. We do the same thing for units, so you can actually see all the different units that are used in the document. So if I click on that, it'll show me in context where that is, so I can make sure that it's used correctly. There's also a filter here, so I can see everything that's consistent with the International System of Units, and I can filter it by everything that's inconsistent. So if you have, if you're using metric throughout your document, and then you have a place where you're mentioning inches or feet, it's just going to make sure that you have that metric measurement alongside it, and you can go through and just quickly check that your units are being used consistently. So both of these issues typically happen when you maybe have multiple authors working on the same document, or maybe you're taking your regulatory standards for the particular project that you're working on and maybe copy and pasting some of those details into your spec, and then you end up with different terms that are inconsistent. By catching those early in the design process, you can eliminate a lot of those errors that are potentially going to come up later on. So back to our presentation here. So we just looked at consistency. So the other three issues that we're going to look at, so the issues that are your requirements are not clear, if they're not testable, or they're inconsistent, these are covered by different areas of QV Scribe. So first we're going to look at the quality analysis, and then we'll look at the similarity at the end. So far we've done wrong content and typos. Next is not clear requirements. So a non-clear requirement just basically means the way that you've decided to express what exists in your mind is written in such a way that there's possibly some different ways that that could be interpreted, and that maybe somebody else that picks it up down the line is not going to interpret the way that you intended. So you can see in the visualization there, it's clear in your mind. On the paper, it could kind of go either way. You read it, you know that it's clear, but maybe somebody else that reads it might mistake it for something else. So I'll give a couple examples of what this looks like. I really like this quote by Alan Greenspan. He's not talking about requirements as far as I know, but I think it fits well. He says, I know you think you understand what you thought I said, but I'm not sure you realize that what you heard is not what I meant. And this type of misunderstanding is a lot more dangerous than just not understanding something at all. If you think you understand what someone has said, you're not going to look for clarification. You're not going to ask the question to figure out what was really meant, because you think that you already know what it means. So I'm going to give a couple examples of how this can manifest in requirements documents. So we'll use this example again from our pacemaker spec. The user interface shall be capable of visually indicating when the DCM and the device are communicating. So the problem word here, problem phrase, is be capable of. So the user interface shall be capable of visually indicating when the DCM and the device are communicating. And this is really, really common. And it's the amount of times that somebody's going to read this and actually misunderstand what it says are probably low, but it's so prevalent, and the opportunity to misunderstand what it's saying is quite high. So I'll give an example to show how this actually plays out and how it could be misunderstood. So say an NFL team was looking for a new kicker, and I was interested in this position, and I saw that on their list of requirements for the new kicker, they say the new kicker shall be capable of kicking a field goal from a distance of 33 yards. Awesome. I've done that once. Maybe every 200 times that I kick it, I can get a field goal. So I am capable of kicking a field goal from a distance of 33 yards. Now, if they hire me based on that requirement, they're going to be very disappointed, because I will not score any points for this team if they hire me to do that. So let's go back to our requirement. So we're using phrases like be capable of, be able to, have the ability to, have the capability to. These all speak to the same issue. You're adding additional words that don't necessarily add clarity to the document, so it makes it harder to read, but also opens the door for possible misunderstanding. So back to this requirement, the user interface shall be capable of visually indicating when the DCM and the device are communicating. So what does this mean? Does this mean that on the interface, there's a tab where you can go and check that they're communicating with each other? It's available under certain circumstances when this is connected, maybe when it's booting up, things like that. It's not really clear what it's asking for. So let's look at a way to make this more concise and eliminate that confusion. So when the DCM is communicating with the device, the user interface shall display a visual indicator. So that's a lot more clear because it's actually showing when this needs to happen and then what needs to happen. And there's no extra words that can possibly muddy the meaning that you have. So it's making it as concise as possible. Another example we'll read here is the duration delay shall be terminated immediately and fallback shall be avoided if during the duration delay, the ATR detection algorithm determines that the atrial tachycardia is over. So this is talking about an emergency state. So it's detected that there's an irregular heartbeat, there's an issue, and then it goes into this duration delay. So it's figuring out if this is something that it needs to respond to. So this behavior, it's really hard to read what you're looking for because first of all, there's multiple imperatives here. We're saying that it shall do this and it shall do that. And then the conditions of when this needs to happen are laid out in kind of a confusing way. So we have in QV Scribe, I'll show you how these issues are identified. But first, I just want to mention the ears method, the easy approach to requirement syntax. This is a way to write requirements that makes them as clear and concise as possible. And it also, through our ears templates that we have available for free on our website, you can download these templates, and then for the type of requirement that you're looking for, it's always structured the same way. So if you have a precondition, when this is supposed to happen, then that precondition comes first, and then you have the event that needs to, that prompts the response that you're looking for, and then you have the response afterwards. So every time you read a sentence, if it's structured this way, the imperative and what needs to happen is always at the end of the requirement. So if it's always structured the same way, everybody that's reading that document gets used to that, and it's really easy to follow along with how the requirements are written. So that template's available on our website. You can send me an email if you're interested in getting those templates from me. So here are some examples of the ears template. So there's a ubiquitous requirement, which is just the system name, shall, and then the response. And then you also have different templates for when it's event-driven, state-driven, unwanted behavior, and optional requirements. So these give you a framework to work with in the way that you write your requirements. If it's not ears, as long as you have a method that you're following the same sentence structure with each of your requirements, it makes it a lot easier to write the requirements as well as read them later on. So I'll jump into QV Scribe for a second to show how these types of vague language can be identified. And you'll see now we have the requirements document open on the left-hand side, and QV Scribe again is open on the right. So we're now under the quality analysis tab. So for quality analysis, it's looking for each individual requirement on its own. How does this stand up against requirements best practices? Then each requirement is given a score from 1 to 5. There are reasons for the score that it's given. And then you'll see that some of them also have this little yellow triangle next to them, which indicates that there is a quality warning. So the quality warnings don't affect the score, but just with that language that's being used, they just want to make sure that it's being used effectively. So I'll choose an example here. This one that we were looking at. So this is how it appears in the document. I click on that requirement. You'll see that the quality score of 1 out of 5 is based on these two issues. It contains multiple imperatives. It contains in vague words. And then we also have a quality warning that some of this is written in passive voice. So anytime that you use passive voice in association with the imperative, the problem that you can run into is that it's not clear who or what is responsible for actually making that happen. It's just saying that it shall happen. So shall be terminated or shall be avoided are both examples of passive voice, where really you should be saying if the system needs to respond in that way, you should be making it clear who the actor is that's responsible for making that happen. So you'll see that on the document itself, these issues are highlighted and they're color coded. So if I select an individual issue here, it will actually show me on the document where those issues are. So you'll see that multiple imperatives, shall, we're trying to talk about two different ideas here, or we're being unnecessarily wordy. And then for vague words, you'll see that the word immediately is highlighted as well. We're going to cover that one in a couple minutes. And also that issue that doesn't affect the score is that it's written in passive voice. So depending on where the passive voice is in the requirement, it may or may not be an issue. But in this case, you can see we're actually not saying who or what is responsible for doing this. We're just stating in general that these things shall happen. So jumping back here, we'll get in a couple more examples here. So back to the one that we were just looking at. I should show it again. The duration delay shall be terminated immediately and fallback shall be avoided if during the duration delay, the ATR detection algorithm determines that the atrial tachycardia is over. So moving back up here, here's another way that this could be written according to the ears template. You can tell me if you think that this is more clear, but you'll see that the template that we've chosen for this is called the event-driven template. So it says when, and then there's any optional preconditions for that, and then what the trigger is, then the system shall, and then the response. So in this case, if you had multiple conditions that needed to be present, you could list those at the beginning, and then say what the trigger is, and then say. So the way we could reword this would be to say, when duration delay is active, so that's a state for this pacemaker, and the ATR detection algorithm detects that the atrial tachycardia is over, then the system shall return to the normal state immediately. So in this case, we were able to take those multiple imperatives and turn them into one. The system shall return to the normal state. So it's determined that the issue is over, so we can go back to the normal state. So this brings up another issue. So you'll come across this, once you start looking for it, you'll come across a lot of these issues where you have multiple imperatives in the same requirement. And you might be asking, when is the right time to split these lists into multiple requirements? So give each response its own requirement. So if you need, under a certain situation, multiple things need to happen when these conditions are present, each of those responses that you expect to happen should have their own requirement statement. That way, when it gets on to the testing phase and QA is doing their thing, they can check off that, yes, it does respond this way. Yes, it does respond this way, without having to read through these long lists or paragraphs that are listing a whole bunch of different conditions all in one. So the time to actually use a list in your requirement spec is if you have these multiple conditions in the same requirement. And if you have more than one or two, it's best to actually put them in a list form like this. But be sure to specify whether all of those conditions need to be present or if just any of them need to be present to elicit the response that you're looking for. So I'll give an example of this as well. Skip ahead to this one. So in this case, we're talking about it's just describing what the lower rate limit means in this document. It says the lower rate limit is the number of generator pace pulses delivered per minute in the absence of, and then it lists two things. So sense intrinsic activity and sensor controlled pacing at a higher rate. So the question when you're looking at this should immediately be, is this when both of these conditions are present, when either of these conditions are present, or when either, both, or either is present? So if you were to revisit this, maybe you determine that if either of these are present or both of them, then that's when this behavior, and this should be defined as the lower rate limit. So you should actually insert that right into the requirement itself. So in the absence of either or both of the following, and then it's really clear that if either of these conditions are present or both of them, that this is what we're talking about with the lower rate limit. A little ahead of myself there. So next we're going to talk about requirements that are possibly misunderstood by the reader. You might be asking, okay, these are like kind of some nitpicky things, okay? Most of the time that somebody reads it, they're not going to have these issues. We have an experienced team. We have a lot of people that have been working on this for a long time. So I'll give an example. So Ultra Electronics looked at this problem that they were having with requirements. And when they came to us, they had three main goals in mind. They wanted to reduce the large total number of hours that were spent discussing and correcting vague or ambiguous requirements. They needed to standardize the requirements process across large multidisciplinary teams. And they also wanted to mitigate potential risks in customer requirements earlier in the bidding process. So if you're a company that's working in the development and manufacturing of a device and you're getting unclear requirements, it's very possible that you'll end up building the wrong thing. And that can cause all kinds of problems, which will ultimately trace back to these documents. So you want to make sure whichever side of that you're on, that you very clearly understand what's being used and what is actually being asked of you for that requirement. So you might be thinking that correcting these issues, what are you going to get out of it versus the time that you're putting into it? When using QV Scribe, Ultra Electronics saw an increase in efficiency, unity, and quality, and they reduced their specification review and update time by 75%. So by people structuring their requirements in the same way, everybody working on the same page, working from the same libraries of language that they're going to use, there were efficiency gains across the board. And just a quote from a case study that we have on that, which if you'd like a copy of it, you can send me a message. But they said, we have a very mature ISO 9001 compliant requirements development process based on INCOSE recommended practices. And I can't recall any instances where there were conflicts between QV Scribe and our existing standards. and this is the part that I like, we have references on good requirements writing, but QV Scribe is faster. So you're improving the quality of your documents and actually saving time in the process. So this isn't like, you weigh off the trade-off of, okay, we're going to spend more time getting our requirements right and then reap the benefits. It's actually both. You're saving time and you're getting a better output on the end. So I don't see a downside. So the next issue we're going to cover is that requirements are not testable. So maybe you're not being specific enough. And that example that we just gave about the lists falls under that. So if something isn't testable, there's actually clues that show you that maybe you have requirements that are written that aren't specific enough. So anytime that you leave gaps, as you can see in the illustration there, you know what you're trying to say, but by the time it gets down on paper, it's still clear to you what it is that you're looking for, but maybe the next person that picks it up doesn't understand what you're looking for, and then you end up with an issue. So that example we just gave is a good one, but the other example here is that we're not specifying, in this case, what we mean by immediately. So that was flagged when we looked at it in QV Scribe. You'll say that it returns the normal state immediately. Well, what is the acceptable standard for that? You folks that are in QA, you know that this is an issue, but it's really hard to find all of these different vague words and to teach an entire team of people that are working on a document which words are okay and not okay. So just by bringing this to the attention of the reader, they can say, oh yeah, I said that this needs to happen immediately, but I really should specify what I mean by that. And so one way to correct this is to dig in and find out what the acceptable amount of time is for it to return to the normal state, and then put that in the specification. That way in testing, it's a lot smoother. You can look at it and say, okay, this is what it's supposed to do. Does it do that? And if it does, it passes. If it doesn't, you've got to revisit it. So it's a specification. The purpose is to be specific. So in this case, we just changed it to within 0.01 seconds, 0.1 seconds, and you just want to make sure that that's the right number, of course. But at that point, you're specifying what you want the device to do. And if the design that comes out on the other end does not meet that requirement, then it needs to be fixed until it does. Some other language that can cause these types of problems, we use the word immediate, but also saying that something should be done adequately, sufficiently, in the typical way, or all the typical documentation, or all the typical senses or settings should be there for this requirement. These are all vague words that can lead to confusion and can result in you getting the wrong thing on the other end. So that's the issue of it not being specific enough. But I hear you saying, but James, sometimes I just don't want to be that specific. I leave it vague so that they can figure out down the road what it's supposed to say. So maybe like this sign, free Wi-Fi and great beer. That's all well and good, but I don't want to be the person at the desk when the person who misunderstood that sign comes down looking for his free beer. So in the same way, if you don't take the time to specify exactly what you expect it to do, you end up with a result that's way off from that. Don't be surprised, and hopefully that teaches you that next time, just specify it from the start and you'll get what you were looking for. So far we've covered 4 of the 5. Wrong content, maybe you've included a typo or mistakenly write the wrong thing. Your requirements are not clear or they're not testable. And lastly, we're going to look at inconsistent requirements. So inconsistent just means that it might be good on its own, but it's not consistent with the other requirements that are in the document. So in developing QV Scribe, it was really important for us to find that balance between, okay, what is actually the role of the professional and what are the areas that QV Scribe can help. And there's a quote from the INCOSE Guide for Writing Requirements that says, a time-saving tool should not take more time to maintain than it saves. So it was really important for us with each feature that we've rolled out and continue to roll out for QV Scribe that it's actually adding to the workflow, and that it's taking less time to complete these tasks, and also it's enjoyable to use. So we're trying to improve the process here. So I'll show you how this works with our similarity analysis. So similarity allows you to check for either inconsistent requirements, that you might have an error, you're talking about the same thing in 2 different places of the document. In one place you specify that it should be one way, elsewhere you specify another. But what similarity also checks for is being unnecessarily redundant. So maybe you're copying and pasting different standards together and you end up repeating yourself. Every time that somebody has to reread the same requirement or retest the same thing that's already been elsewhere in the document, that's wasted time. So at the beginning of the project, when you're working on the requirements spec, if you can take the time to make sure that you're writing each requirement once and only once, and that you're doing it consistently, you can save a lot of time on the other end. So here's what it looks like in the tool. This is QV Scribe for Word. Again, so same document, we'll look over at the similarity analysis, and we'll just pick an example here. There's a threshold at the top here. So I can scroll this up to 100% or down to 50%, and it will show me any requirements that are at least that similar to one another. So it's not pointing out these errors to you. It's not showing that this is inconsistent or this is right or this is wrong. It's simply giving you the information to say, okay, these two requirements are talking about the same thing. You might want to have a look to make sure that they're not contradicting each other, or that they're both necessary. So we'll click on one example here. The pulse width PRR pace parameter shall have a value between 0.5 and 0.02. So that's identified as 86% similar to this other requirement, which says the pulse with pace now state shall be a value between 1 and 0.02. So these are different values. One is 0.5 and one is 1. And so I can look at these in context. You'll see that it's now a split screen view. So I have my document open twice so I can look at both of them in context. I see that one is talking about the power on reset state. And then the other one, if I scroll up, is the pace now state. So in looking at these in context, I can determine, okay, that's why these are different, is because one of them is talking about one state and the other is talking about another. But if these were maybe hundreds of pages apart in a document and actually talking about the same thing, having QV Scribe bring those to your attention so that you can see them in context and see that they're in contradiction can go a long way in helping to improve this type of thing. The alternative is you read every single requirement in your spec with that requirement open. I know some of you do that. You look at each requirement and you compare it against that one, and one at a time you do this. Very painstaking, very tedious task. QV Scribe can help improve that as well. So if we take this slider just for fun, put it up to 100%, this will actually show me any requirements in my document that are exactly the same. And we actually have a similar outcome here. So I can pick up this, see them in context. And one is talking about the power on reset state and the pace now state again. These two are actually exactly the same. So if these were elsewhere in the document, I could quickly check to make sure that both of them are necessary before I move on. So that's the similarity analysis. And we actually have a new feature coming out in a release within the next couple of weeks. It's in testing right now. We've actually improved the similarity analysis, where now we'll actually show you the differences between these requirements. So this is a quick screenshot of it. So you'll see at the bottom, we now have everything that is the same highlighted in green, and everything that's different about these requirements is highlighted in red. So it'll show you how similar they are. You can filter them in the same way, but it's actually going to show you now where the differences are, so you can make sure that you're being consistent. So far we've covered wrong content, typos, unclear, untestable, and inconsistent requirements. And again, the focus with QV Scribe is to allow you to focus on that first category. So any wrong content in your document, if you're spending less time reviewing all of these other things because it's already been caught by the tool as the author is writing it, then you can spend more time making sure that the content of your document contains everything that you want it to have, and nothing that shouldn't be there. So what happens next? So you've identified, or maybe, so an error makes it through one way or another through your document. What happens next? Well, if you're lucky, somebody catches it at that phase and then goes back and asks the question. So all that's lost is a bunch of wasted time and all these different people having the same conversation over and over to make sure that something is clear. What more often happens is that this issue is perhaps understood by the first person that reads it, and then it moves on and it gets copied and pasted into another document. But anytime something like this is written, generally these things are going to exist for a long time. So how many people are going to be reading these documents? If you catch it in the requirement stage and it is an actual issue, the amount of effort and time and cost that it takes to replace it or to fix it at that stage is negligible compared to if it's in the design stage or in the verification stage or it's out in market already. So if you can catch these issues in the requirement stage, the savings from, whether it's a recall, an update that needs to be pushed out to all the devices, if you can catch it in the requirement stage, you're a lot better off. So back to that electronics case study, they said that the detecting and correcting requirements errors in the definition phase before they can propagate to later phases of development where they become increasingly costly to fix is the greatest potential savings factor that QV Scribe offers. So another way to look at this is to say, how many requirements are in this document and how many readers? You might say, you know, this is like this issue that's been caught here. Everybody's gonna understand that. We've all been working together for years. Everybody knows what I mean by that, so I don't really need to go and fix these things. But let me ask, how many readers are looking at this? Maybe you have a 1 in a million issue. And I'm going to reference back to QV Trace for a second. So in verifying that these embedded systems, software systems are going to perform the way that they're expected, we'll look at a couple of different examples here. So you have the space vehicle that's used for taking astronauts to and from the International Space Station. It makes trips once every 90 days. It holds 3 people. It delivers the astronauts, the other one, cosmonauts for the Russians, and then come home every 90 days. Compare that with an airline. So there are 100,000 trips per day, more now, 100,000 trips by airplane per day. So if you have an embedded system error in the space vehicle, then 1 trip every 90 days, you're unlikely to come across that. In the example with the airlines, 100,000 trips per day, if you have an error that's present in that, that's maybe 1 in a million, you're going to come across that every 10 days on average, that's going to come up. But now what we're entering into, and this is where the focus of QV Trace is for the transportation world, and again, this can reference back to those of you that are involved in robotics and robot surgeries, things like that. We now have 10 million trips per day being done with cars, this is by the end of 2020, that have autonomous features. So that could be an adaptive cruise control system. These are all controlled by embedded systems. So if you look at a 1 in a million error, back to our roots, which was in aerospace, every 250,000 years, that 1 in a million error will come up in this device. If you have an error on a commercial airline, it's going to come up every 10 days. You're going to have that same issue. Whereas now, with autonomous vehicles, more and more of these vehicles are on the road. So if you have one small embedded error in one of these systems, then it's going to happen every 25 minutes. So 1 in a million isn't so crazy. So what we're looking at now, when you have all these different readers for your requirements, you maybe have something that could be written more clearly, but you don't think it's really that important. You need to consider how many people are reading your document. So if the wrong person happens to pick up on that, we call it the perfect storm scenario. Somebody misunderstands something and it just goes out that way. What are the possible repercussions for that? What could possibly go wrong from a requirement not being specific and then your device not being built to the correct standard? So what we want to focus on, again, is uniting your team and helping you to focus on getting the content right. We also have a QV Scribe for Teams solution. So QV Scribe for Teams is deployed on your network. There's concurrent licensing to share the available seats between different users. There's a custom analysis configuration available to all users. We didn't really get into that on the demo, but there's a list of default words and default language that it's looking for. So what constitutes a correct imperative, what's optional language, what's vague language. Each of those are customizable by the individual users. And if you're using QV Scribe for Teams, then that's actually controlled by an administrator. So for those of you that are overseeing people, half of you that are on this call, that are overseeing people that are writing requirements, you can specify which standard the team should be using for this particular project. And then as they're working on that, they're checking against that standard. So just to give a quick example of how this is being used, the Canadian military is using QV Scribe for Teams. And with the requirement scoring that we saw, so that scoring from 1 to 5 for each requirement, they require that by the time it moves on to the peer reviews, and they have these sessions where everybody gets together for testing their requirements and checking them and getting everybody on the same page, they require that they achieve a certain number of 5 out of 5 scores before it can be submitted. So in that way, everybody is working against the same language, they're using the same standards, and then once they all reach that certain level of quality, then they get together. So the results for them, what used to take them a week that they'd set aside for an individual project, so you're dealing with about 3,000 requirements that are all coming together. They used to take a week to review each of those. They're now doing that in a day, because as each author is working on their requirements, they're all adhering to the same standard. So guess what they're talking about for that 1 day a week? The content of the requirement, not the details, the nitpicky, hey, we said we weren't going to use that word, remember? Oh yeah, I went to that lunch and learn 3 years ago and they told me that this is an error that you can have. When these issues are being flagged, it allows each user, regardless of their interest in requirement clarity, regardless of their experience, it shows them, hey, this needs some work. You need to focus on this. and that gets everybody on the same page. And then lastly, the client controls user management. So you'd have control over which users are using QE Scribe at different times. So something to keep in mind for the larger teams there. If you have beyond really 5 people is kind of the threshold. If you have 5 people that are working on requirements, you should definitely be looking into QE Scribe for teams. So in hindsight, looking back on our talk today, I hope you found it really helpful. But I hope that as you're looking at your projects now, these issues that are coming up later in the project development, you can look back on it and say, oh, well, actually, maybe there are solutions available for this. Maybe we can improve our requirements process and end up with fewer of these symptoms later on. And I won't give away the ending of the movie, very ending, mostly because it kind of ruins my analogy, but until he realized that these symptoms were actually part of a physical condition, he wasn't able to address them. So that's something that we want to keep in mind here as well. So some next steps, if you're interested in learning more about QV Scribe, I'd be happy to give you a more in-depth demo. We just kind of showed a couple of highlights of it today, but I can actually use one of your own documents if you'd like. So we can sign an NDA if necessary, but we can use one of our sample documents or one of your own. But we can come up with a personalized solution for how this would work with your systems and the other software that you're using. And you can follow the link in the follow-up email to schedule your call. We'll also make all of these slides available as well. If you just send me an email, I can send you a PDF of the slides if you'd like to review some of this content after the fact. So I'm going to see if there's been any questions as we've been traveling along here. And if you do have any questions that we didn't address, feel free to ask them now. And Trevor will relay those to me, and then we'll wrap up. Trevor, do we have any questions?
We do. We have one that says, oh, okay, I should just say would it be possible to share the slides along with the recorded video?
Yes. So the question was, is it possible to share the slides along with the recorded video? Each of you that registered with your email address, as soon as the link is available online, I'll shoot you an email so that you have access to that as well. If you'd like a copy of the slides, just respond to that email and I'll make sure you get the slides as well.
And the next question I have, how do you integrate author requirements with Jira?
Good question. I meant to mention that because a large percentage of you that responded, about 25% of those that filled out the survey before the talk actually indicated that they were using Jira. So Atlassian or Confluence, Atlassian and Jira. So we actually use Atlassian ourselves in our product development. So the way it works for us is we're using Word documents within Jira, and we do have some workflows for that. So if you're writing the requirements in Word, you can run the analysis on it and put it into Jira. And there are workflows where at certain times in the process, you can actually fairly easily export those requirements, run the analysis on them again, and then upload your changes. So that's the way it would work with Jira and also with other requirements management tools as well. There's different workflows that we can focus on for that. So good question.
Another question, should you write software versus hardware-based requirements differently?
Should you write? Yeah, so there is some different approaches to the hardware versus software requirements. Typically with software, there's a lot of focus on agile type methodology. So there's different systems for very quick iterations and quick changes. I would say something that's missing in that piece is taking the time to clearly define your requirements from the beginning. So in that way, I think they're the same. Typically, physical products that you're developing have more of a waterfall type approach, whereas software requirements have more of an iterative or ongoing changing approach. But one thing that's consistent is whether you're using requirements, formal requirement statements, or user stories, you still want to make sure that that user story that you're writing is getting the point across. So you want to be using clear language, even if it's written in a different format. And then what's really important is as these evolve, make sure that those requirements documents are being updated along with the changes that you're making, because that way, when you get to testing and you ultimately need to decide if this system, this solution is doing what you need it to do, you want to make sure that you have a standard to test that against.
I have another question. Can this help with compliance of ISO 13485?
Yes. So regarding your different compliance standards that you're working towards. This was just asking if it helps with compliance to ISO 13485. There are other systems out there. A lot of you found us through the Greenlight Guru blog, and Greenlight is completely focused on helping you adhere to those standards. The way that QV Scribe helps with that is if you're writing your requirements using QV Scribe, then it allows you, as you're bringing those different standards together and incorporating them into your document, by making sure that everything's clear and consistent, and then also generating that paper trail as you make changes to your document as you go along. You can show that your document is evolving and getting more clear as it goes along, which can help with your compliance as well of keeping everything consistent.
And a follow-up to the hardware-software requirements question. How do product requirements fit into the EARS standard of writing if they will need to be refined further on in the software hardware requirements?
Okay, so the question was if you have requirements that are written in the EARS format that need to be refined later on. The EARS templates are basically giving you the overall structure for the way your document should be written. And if you follow that consistently throughout, it just makes it easier for everybody that reads as you go along. If you're refining those requirements later on, the overall structure of the sentences should be the same. So if you're changing the individual content saying, okay, we thought we wanted to do this, but now we want it to do that, you can still follow the EARS template from start to finish. So it won't have an impact later on. You won't have to jump from EARS to another system. You can still express those requirements in the same way, even if they're evolving as you go along.
And in the Q&A box, we have a question on where do you go for information on pricing?
Yeah, so pricing, there's not a page, but if you shoot me an email directly, we can figure out how many users you're looking for and what solutions would work best for you. And then I'd be happy to walk through pricing with you as well. So james@curacorp.com, and I'll be happy to get the pricing over to you.
Sabine asked, where can we find those templates?
Templates? Yes, I'd be happy to send them to you by email. If you just Google QRA templates, QRA requirements templates, they'll come up, but probably easier I could just send it to you directly. If you shoot me in a message, I can fire that over to you pretty quick as well. Okay. That's just about it for time, so we'll just see if there are any other questions. That's it. All right, so again, I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking the time. And again, I hope that you found this very helpful, and I wish you all the best with your requirements. We hope to help. Thanks.